thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of the Immigration ABC's podcast. I am Dustin Saldarriaga, an immigration lawyer with Scott Legal PC in New York City. And today we have a very special guest with us, Adam Goldman. Adam has over 20 years of experience as both a business investor and a franchise consultant. He has personally founded 3 successful companies on 2 continents, including an IT company in Poland and a real estate investment company in Texas, which happens to be my home state way back when. Most recently, he grew a company, the Vanguard Cleaning Area Developer Concept in Houston, into a multi-million-dollar a year enterprise with over 30 franchisees and 300 customers, which is quite an accomplishment. And I will say that our firm looks to Adam for assistance when we have, in particular, E-2 visa clients who are looking to go the franchise route on their E-2 visa, to start a franchise and apply for the E-2 visa that way. So we're very grateful to Adam for sharing his expertise with us and our clients. And I think that our audience is going to find a lot of helpful knowledge and information from Adam on this episode. So Adam, thank you so much for being with us today. It really is an honor.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Great to finally visit with you and to see you in person or by virtually on Zoom.
Absolutely. So Adam, why don't you tell us initially what drew you to franchise consulting?
So great question. I kind of stumbled into it, right? So had this successful business, Vanguard Cleaning, built it up and just kind of was at this place where I had an unsolicited offer and I decided to take it. It was a really, really good offer and didn't know what I was going to do when I grew up and just kind of stumbled into this and decided I really liked it. I really liked the idea of just kind of helping people when they're going through a transition, whether or not it's a corporate exec in the United States or frankly, someone that's looking to emigrate to the United States from an E-2 perspective, and just really, really have enjoyed my time. I've done this for over 7 years now. Love it very much.
Perfect. And you have personally started companies on a couple different continents, as I mentioned before. So how does that shape how you advise people who are navigating the process themselves?
I think it gives me a little bit more empathy, right? When I talk to candidates, and look, I've done placements both in Europe and also Canada and spoken to people in Asia. I feel like I have some empathy as someone that's visited many different countries, lived abroad for 7 years, right? Open businesses there, just a different mindset to kind of navigate that world of someone looking to make a huge leap to come from another place, the United States, with their family. It's a big deal, life-changing decision. The fact that I've visited their place or even done business in Europe, that's actually been helpful for me in empathizing with them.
Perfect. And we have that, you have that in common with us. And in particular, when we work with our E-2 visa clients, as you know very well, oftentimes these are people who are making an enormous pivot in their lives to move to the United States, put a lot on the line, a lot of money that they've saved up typically, and just moving their families and their lives here. So that certainly resonates. I'll quickly say that our first episode on the podcast was specifically on the E-2 visa. And Adam, we spoke with Ian, who I know you know. Ian is the founder of our firm. He is on an E-2 visa right now. So for our listeners who want to learn a little bit more about an E-2 visa, do check out that first episode with Ian. I won't say much about the E-2 in this episode, other than to say it is one of the best visa options for someone who wants to come to the United States to develop and direct a business. So franchises can be a wonderful way for them to do that. Adam, why don't you say a little bit about why franchising may be and oftentimes is a great option for someone applying for an E-2 visa when they're looking at what business options are out there?
I want to say that E-2 visas, specifically franchise E-2 visas, are the best kept secret in immigration, right? I have never had anyone even close to being rejected from an E-2 visa application, and doing this now for 7 years. The amount is so much less than an EB-5. I have people that are investing all in less than 100K, not saying all the time, but every once in a while they're very inexpensive investments that people can get in very inexpensively. It's just an amazing business. Now, the one caveat I want to say is that when people think about franchises, they think, oh my gosh, McDonald's, multi-million dollar investment. I think the caveat for me is I've had the most success with E2 when it's service businesses, right? Where you kind of go to the consulate and look, you guys are the attorneys, but my understanding is that you go, you have a plan, and you say, hey, I'm ready to go. I have my van. I'm ready to go. Oh, here it is. It might not be glamorous, but I have this cleaning company or I have this painting company, and here's my business plan and here's my truck. We're ready to go. We've already set up our LLC and it gets approved, as opposed to saying, you know, I have this idea for McDonald's, but I haven't really signed my lease yet and everything else. Then it probably doesn't get approved, but it's just a really amazing way to kind of get entrance into the U.S.
That's exactly right. So, right, what the government is oftentimes looking at is how many people the business is going to employ, how many U.S. workers, whether that's U.S. citizens, permanent residents, or those who have work authorization in the U.S. while on a non-immigrant visa. So, Adam, as you're saying, you know, if you show up and you tell the government, I am starting a business that is satisfying a real need in the community, to satisfy that need, I'm going to need to hire U.S. workers. And by the way, this is a recognizable franchise. That is a benefit, because keep in mind, franchise isn't the only path to an E2, right? It could be a startup. And if it's a startup based only on a business plan, which frankly we do handle oftentimes, that's the way our clients get E2 visas, having a franchise behind you that is recognizable can be a leg up. So, Adam, I'm not surprised to hear that those you've worked with have had such success with the E2s. Of course, as you said, not always guaranteed, but I think the fact is, if you have a good franchise behind you, where the disclosure document shows, here's the investment amount, here's what we're seeing in other locations, here's what the average sales are, that can be a real benefit. So when a client comes to you, Adam, and you find out they're an E2 applicant, how does that change your approach compared to someone who is not planning to apply for a visa?
Well, let's be blunt. Not all of my brands are E2 approved, right? So I have pre-screened brands in 75 different industries, right? Not all of them are E2 approved visas and E2 approved franchisors. And look, people come to me because they want to know that it's not like on a website it says E2 approved like advertised, right? I mean, to know ahead of time that something's E2 approved is a benefit, as opposed to kind of being on the internet and scrolling through these different lists and just calling them one at a time saying, oh, are you E2 friendly or not? What I would also say is that every person's different, right? So if someone's an E2 candidate, maybe English isn't their first language, right? If you can speak great English, it's a huge, huge advantage. In fact, I don't really have many franchise brands that are going to really work with you if you can't speak any English at all, right? Maybe you're not great at selling, right? That's also something as well. Certain brands that are E2 friendly still require you to be good at business development. So it's a really customizable approach that I give for every single candidate that I work with, E2 or not.
Perfect. And when you say E2 approved, specifically, what are you looking for there? Is that a label you give them, or is that the franchisor that they are aware of what the E2 is and they've proactively taken those steps?
Look, some franchise brands have made a decision that they don't want E2 candidates, right? Others have made the decision. They say, hey, look, you know, I think this is an interesting idea. They've seen Hamilton. The musical, they see the where they say immigrants, they get the job done, right? And they're like, wait a second.
Very
here.
true.
If I have someone that really has a lot on the line, that's high caliber, that's an amazing business person, maybe even has a business in Canada or in Pakistan or the UK, that's really, really high caliber, that needs this thing to work out, and they see the value in having someone like that in their system, that's great. You want to know ahead of time if they're open to it or not.
Absolutely. And when you talk about these franchisors that are E2 approved, you mentioned service industries before. Can you give us a little more detail? What do you find getting a little more nuance? What type of service businesses are you seeing being kind of those that tend to draw E-2 applicants mostly?
So let's talk a little bit, and I can't, with the caveat that I can't go into specific brands,
Sure.
right? But let's just kind of talk about this. A lot of candidates that I talk to are very cash sensitive, right? I mean, if someone comes to me and says, my total budget is 30K or 50K all in, I can't really help them very much. If they say 100K all in, right? Maybe, right? I mean, on the low end of service brands, we're looking at 150, 125, 150, maybe, right? And so what we're really focused upon is we're focused upon businesses that have scalability, but are kind of on the lower end of the equation, right? And so these businesses might be things that aren't that expensive to get into, but still have scalability. And so we're probably looking at things that aren't very glamorous. I mean, one of my favorite industries, frankly, is painting. I just love painting in general. It's not that expensive to get into. I have a friend that started a painting business from scratch and built it up in his first year into a really, really big business. I like painting for E-2 candidates. I like the fact that they're able to somehow be able to scale it. I'm just a big fan of businesses like that are simple business models.
Mm-hmm. We actually just got our house painted last month, and I had no idea that it took so much work. I thought you just grabbed a paintbrush and started, but the process of even sanding just is so labor intensive. So I have newfound respect for those who do that work. So Adam, I think it'd be helpful for our audience to walk through the process. If you could give us a sense, a really, practical, tell us. So let's say we have an E-2, someone who's interested in an E-2 visa, wants to go the franchise route. Let's say they're from Canada. What is step one typically for them? And then from step one to actually going to the consulate to apply for the visa, or even after, if you want to go after, what are the key milestones in that process?
So first step is that they need to first talk to me, and we need to make sure that they're financially qualified, that they have the resources to do this, right? So they fill out a survey. Then we have a more in-depth conversation where I get to know them really, really well, because the better I know them, the better matches I can make for them. And then after we have that, I go ahead and write this 2-page letter or model where I'm not even worried about brand, but just more focused on characteristics of an ideal franchise. Things such as how many employees they want, if they prefer blue collar or white collar. And then I see which brands are available that are E-2 friendly, that are in their home market. And I'm trying to give them 3 different business models to compare and contrast. And then what happens is that I go ahead and connect them to the top 3. And they go ahead and together we kind of navigate through these different brands and see which one's a fit, either culturally or when it comes to earnings claims and validation with existing franchisees. And then what happens is after we go through that, they go ahead and they say yes or no. And that's where you come in, right? Where they're in a situation where they can say, hey, this is going to take X amount of time at the consulate, and this is how this works, and these are the documents that we need, and this is how the franchise brand is going and helping me. And I've had situations where it's been done in a couple months' time, and I've had situations where it's taken a little bit more than that, right? Especially during the pandemic. So that's kind of a high-level idea about how the process works.
Perfect. And when one of the aspects that we are frequently talking with clients about is some of the, I'll call them protections, that may be available to someone who's not in the US. If you're inside the US and you're taking the steps to start a franchise, you can actually see the space. You can actually oftentimes meet in person with the franchise representatives, I assume. Whereas if you're abroad, it can be very scary. I mean, we work with clients who have to put, as you said, $100,000, typically a franchise fee based on what I've seen. And Adam, let me know if this is inaccurate, but in the $40,000 realm is typical, again, based on what I've seen in terms of a franchise fee. But even putting that on the line when you're outside the US, and it may not come to fruition if a consular officer decides to deny, that is scary. And I'm sure you have that conversation a lot with the individuals you're working with. So can you talk through some of those protections that might be available again with the E2 approved franchisors? What is in place, and how do you kind of help your clients navigate and get to a point of a little more comfort and security in the process, given that they're abroad?
Great question. So what I would say, Dustin, is this. I have two types of franchisors, right? Some franchisors are willing to go ahead and to say, hey, look, I'm going to write an agreement with you. You don't have to put any money down until this thing gets approved. That's awesome, right? I have other brands that are great brands, but they just made a decision. They say, look, if you want this franchise, fine, but this is non-refundable, this money. And someone needs to make the decision and say, hey, look, this might be the perfect franchise, but I have X amount of money on the line for a franchise fee that's kind of non-refundable. What do I do? But also with a caveat, Dustin, to know that, frankly, there are no guarantees in life, but I have never had one of these things not approved, right? So I'm not guaranteeing anything, but I'm just saying that I've never had it not approved before.
Adam, I'm curious if you're sitting there in the room with a client who is kind of interviewing a franchisor, trying to figure out, is this the one? I think you mentioned before, you typically will present three options, if I understand correctly. When the client is talking with each of those three prospects, what do you find are the key questions that they should be asking? What are they really looking for? And again, kind of cutting through the noise, getting to the signal. What do you think are really the important things that they need to be asking the franchisor?
That's a great question. It's not necessarily, I would argue, it's not asking questions to the franchisors per se. It's asking questions to franchisees, specifically E2 franchisees. How much money are you making? How long did it take you to make this? How good of support are you getting from the franchisor? Are they doing what they say they're going to be doing? Would you do this all over again? If you could go back in time to when you started, what would you do differently about this?
And that's a great point. And I have a follow-up question for you. Is it typical? I assume it is typical. The disclosure documents that I've seen from franchisors tend to share information about other franchisees. So is it just common in the industry that you will be connected with other franchisees and be able to ask them whatever questions you have?
It's your money, right? I mean, you have the phone number and email of every single franchisee. It's on your shoulders to do due diligence. I mean, life-changing decision. How could you not be calling these people and seeing what they have to say?
Absolutely. Perfect. And, that's a nice segue to my next question, which is, what are the common mistakes that you see people make when they are embarking on this path to become a franchisee, and how can they avoid those mistakes?
I think the number one mistake I see are people just kind of coming into this whole E2 thing, right? But they come into it maybe without even talking to an attorney, right? They're just kind of going in and not even knowing where to start. And they come to you and say, Adam, I talked to Crumble Cookie and I talked to McDonald's, but I only have $100,000 to invest. What do you think I should do? I haven't talked to a franchise attorney as well. And I only want to have businesses that are brick and mortar, that are glamorous, right? And just kind of being open to businesses that aren't necessarily so glamorous, talking to experts both on the immigration side and also on the franchise side to kind of narrow it down to E2 friendly ones. Doing the homework ahead of time and just realizing that you're probably not going to be in a very glamorous business, but that's okay, and kind of going through this process.
Excellent. And this is, this is a bit of an unusual question, and the answer may be you just don't run into people like this. But do you ever have clients that after talking with them, you say, you know what, a franchise just isn't a good fit for you? And again, I'm limiting the scope to E2 individuals. Do you ever run into people like that? And could you describe, if any, what E2 applicants would not be suitable for this franchise route?
Number one, resources, right? I mean, some people come in saying, I only have X amount of money, right? I mean, not having enough to do something like this would be one. Number two, no English or lack of English. I've had people that just don't really make the cut. If you don't speak good enough English, then you're not going to be a good fit. I think number three, just in general, someone that's just not a fit for franchising in general. You might be the most amazing person in the world, but if you come into this process with arrogance, right, or thinking that you just know better and you're not willing to follow a system, and it's pretty obvious you just kind of want a visa, right, then it's probably not a fit for you. You've got to get approved by the franchise brand as well, and they frankly want good people in their system.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to shift the time frame right now and look after the visa's been issued. Let's assume this is someone you've been working with. They went to the consulate. Again, let's assume they're Canadian. They go to Toronto. They get the visa. They're in the U.S. What is your role, if any, at that point? Do you stay in touch with them? What does it look like at that point?
So, great question. So, in 7 years, I've done 140 placements with my candidates in 280 territories. Many of them have been E-2, right? What I can tell you is that I'm not the kind of person that makes a placement and just disappears. If someone decides to invest, they become a family member of mine. And what I mean by that is that they can call me at any time, right? But even more interesting, I've created a roundtable every other month where it's kind of all these different candidates that are in different industries. They kind of bounce ideas off each other. It's just kind of a journey that people have. And they kind of get to, if you decide to invest through me, then you can kind of ask other people and say, hey, how are things going? Or what do you do for marketing? And it's fascinating, Dustin, if you see someone in a different industry, you might be able to learn from them. They might have a new approach to something you got going on in your industry.
Incredible. And I assume that a lot of the value of the roundtables is navigating the relationship with the franchisor as well. So can you tell me a little bit more? What does that relationship look like? I'm sure there is a spectrum. There are franchisors that want to be more involved, that have more constraints, and there are those with fewer constraints. Can you say a little bit about what you tend to find, what the role of the franchisor tends to be? And if you have any advice as people are, again, kind of going through the process of sorting through what options might be available and picking which franchisor might be a good fit for them.
So what I would say is there's two misconceptions. Let's talk about two extremes, Dustin. So the first extreme is someone says, hey, look, this franchisor is going to do everything for me. I'm just going to invest this money as an E-2 applicant, and they're just going to do everything. I just kind of sit back, I'll get my visa, the money will kind of roll in my bank account. The other extreme is someone that says the franchise brand is going to do nothing. They're going to give me an approval, right? They're going to get this thing done at the consulate, but I'm going to have to make everything work. They're going to give me no system or no nothing, and I'm just going to have to do everything and learn it by myself. The reality is somewhere in between. I don't care which franchise brand it is. They're going to give you the support and the system and also the network of other people, but you got to make it happen, right? So it's somewhere in between that spectrum, right? So that's what I would say, something to expect. What I would also say is that once you decide to invest in something, obviously do great validation. But once you kind of decide this is the right fit for me from a cultural perspective and based on what other people, especially other E-2 people, have said, then when you actually decide to sign, I want my candidates to be the best friend with the development team, not the development team, I'm sorry, the support team. And the reason why is that they have limited resources. I don't care which franchise brand it is, and you got to be their best friend, because if you're their best friend for the support team, then they're going to spend more time to make sure you're a success.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So Adam, taking a big step back and given your years of experience, where are we now in the franchise market? What trends are you seeing? And what do you think we will see over the next few years? And by that, I mean within the next 5 years, that will be different from where we are today.
So it's interesting. Our business is very, if you talk about franchising in general, we're very counter-cyclical. So what I mean by that is that whenever there's some sort of event like COVID, right, and some sort of disruption, it's kind of like a 6 months to a 1 year lag, then there becomes a boom in our industry. We're talking today on August 5th. The market's gone down like 3 to 5% over the past 2 days, right? People are talking about recession in the United States. What I say is that maybe we're heading to another recession, right? Which means, frankly, more interest in franchising in general. And more people losing their job and looking for in the franchising space. What I would also say from the E2 perspective is I really believe the U.S. being like this light, right, in the world. I mean, you see people that just want to escape different places, right? I mean, I'm seeing that from Canada, never more so than I've ever seen before. I don't see that trend going anywhere anytime soon. So what I'd also say, too, is that in my industry, there's a lot more interest in non-brick and mortar businesses. Just in general, people were much more interested in retail, before the pandemic. I'd say that 70 or 80% of my placements now are non-brick and mortar service businesses. And it makes a lot of sense because it's easier to ramp those up.
And can you give us some examples of those non-brick and mortar businesses?
Sure. Another one, like I mentioned before, is painting, right? But
right, okay.
Look, I have things that are related to child enrichment, right? Where you don't necessarily need to have a brick and mortar location. I mean, that's actually an interesting, yes, everyone's heard of Kumon before, but there are a lot of kids enrichment related businesses that are asset light, where you don't actually have a retail storefront.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So Adam, at this point, I'm going to hand the mic to you, figuratively, and I'm going to ask you, what do you think our audience should know? Again, prospective E-2 visa applicants, curious about the franchise route, that we haven't talked about already. Is there any information you want to make sure they know about?
I think we've covered it pretty well.
Okay, great. Perfect. Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and to share your wisdom and your experience helping people navigate the franchise journey. To our listeners, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. We hope you found this episode helpful. Please do subscribe, leave a review, share this show with anyone who might be thinking about building a business in the U.S., and do check out Adam's website, franchisevisa.net, if you are at all curious about the franchise option to an E-2 visa. Everyone, have a wonderful day. We hope to see you soon.